Namaste, nerds. It is time to talk about India and religions or even philosophical systems within it, and wondering how those civilizations were affected, the civilizations of India, were affected by Hinduism and Buddhism. Namaste is an Indian term from Sanskrit connected to Hinduism. That means the divine in me acknowledges the divine in you. Isn't that nice? So, let's get into it. Our big idea for today is, how does a civilization's belief system or systems influence its development? Our objectives are students will be able to describe the major beliefs of Hinduism and Buddhism and evaluate how Hinduism and Buddhism influence the social and gender structures of classical India. I just so used to saying classical China, it seems. India, of course, is what we're discussing tonight. So, just a quick thing about timing. Please make sure, by the way, that you're completing your guided notes as we go through this. There are two significant dynasties within classical India. The Mauryan dynasty, this is in BCE, 322 to 232, so about a century before the Common Era, marked especially by Chandragupta Maurya and Ashoka, more about him later, and the Gupta dynasty, which happens a few hundred years later, in beginning around 320 CE and lasting a few hundred years. The Huns eventually just knock them out, unfortunately, for the Guptas. Hinduism begins before the era of the Mauryan dynasty and the time period of the Vedas. The Vedas are kind of pre-Hindu texts and religious traditions that influence Hinduism. So Hinduism is basically the world's oldest religion that still exists. It isn't to say it's the first religion. There are many others before it. Religion, as we'll talk about shortly, it's been in existence since people started questioning why they were there, why they were on Earth. But we're going to talk about social structures later on, so let's make sure to address what that even means now. These are hierarchical systems, right? So it tells you who's important, who has power, who has status, and who doesn't. Your gender influences that. Your economics influence that. So in America, we might talk about the 1% and the 99%, or the upper class and the upper middle class, and the working poor, the impoverished, etc. Well, that hierarchy is something we could study in any civilization. India is certainly no exception. So often the people at the top are a smaller percentage of the overall population, but they have more power, and the people at the bottom have less power, but they're a larger portion of the social structure. Pretty soon you'll see that in India there is and has been a very significant and clearly divided caste system. This is India's version, Hinduism's version of a hierarchical social structure. A few words to note. Gender structures. So this is the relationship between men and women. Unfortunately, often women throughout history have had lesser power than men in society, and it's social institutions that enforce this gender disparity, this gender gap. So it can be as unformalized as family structures, and in this case, if we're talking about family society. So India, notice it's a very diverse place. It's diverse in terms of topography, the kind of the mountainous and less mountainous regions, rivers, valleys, plains, etc. It is in South Asia. We should note this is South Asia. It's a subcontinent, the Indian subcontinent, and as I mentioned, it's diverse in terms of what the land looks like from the Indus River, and I think you're going to have to draw the Indus and the Ganges River, in addition to the Deccan Plateau and all these other regions of India. But it's diverse in how the land looks, but also in who the people are. And so it's important to understand that there are cultural differences in India as a result. Now, even though there are cultural differences regionally, even in terms of what types of food people in different parts of India eat because of these cultural differences, we're not going to focus on these individual regional differences. We're going to focus more on the larger trends of India. Now, it's important to note that Chandragupta Maurya of the Mauryan dynasty unified these smaller Aryan kingdoms, kingdoms of people who came down from mostly Iran, and formed this civilization in and around 321 BCE. So he's the unifier of this vast and diverse India. Okay, so religion. In any society, it's interested in the big questions. What happens when we die? Why are we here? Why do bad things happen to good people? And it's a reflection of the world around us. So in Mesopotamia, for example, there are violent rivers that are prone to random flooding. And so life is harder. And how is that explained in Mesopotamia, Babylon, for example? Well, there are mean gods relative to Egypt, where the gods seem nicer, kinder, gentler in a sense. Because in Egypt, it's probably a better life than in Mesopotamia. In Egypt, the Nile is calm and predictable. So the gods reflect the life of the people. Okay, just to give you a heads up of where we're heading, eventually you're going to have a comparison between Hinduism and Buddhism, so pay close attention to the similarities and differences and reflect those in your Venn diagram on the back. Okay, so Hinduism. Hinduism is, as I mentioned, the world's oldest continually, we might say the world's oldest living religion. It starts with Brahmanism. So before there are straight up Hindus, there are Aryans who are coming down from mostly Iran and going in through the Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro. And they're bringing Brahmanism, this idea that that Brahma is the supreme creator of all things. So, in a sense, God, right? Not necessarily a person. Brahma is in fact manifested in many different forms. So Hinduism looks polytheistic. In fact, when I took Intro to Hinduism in college, the professor said there are actually more Hindu gods than there are Hindus. That's how many different personal gods are worshipped. But all of them are really manifestations of a single supreme force, this idea of Brahma. And Brahmins are the priests who especially study and worship and try and get close to Brahma. One of the examples of these gods is Vishnu, who's a preserver, or Shiva, the destroyer. I had a friend in college named Shiva, and he broke a lot of things, but I don't think it has to do with his name necessarily. Shiva is a god that's destroying. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean Shiva is a bad god. Destruction is seen in Hinduism and in many cultures and religions as essential to the process of rebirth, recreation. You need to destroy in order to create anew. So anyway, back to Brahma. Life, the goal of life in Hinduism is to merge with Brahma. This is not a small task. It's going to take a while. It might even take multiple lives. Whoa. More on that in a moment. By the way, I just want to point out, of course, you can pause at any point to take notes. Are there any questions? I'm just kidding. You can't realistically ask questions. Though you can email me, assuming you've already asked your question to 3 classmates and you CC me on the email. So let's talk about how you achieve Brahma through rebirth. Now, in Hinduism, there is something called the cycle of reincarnation, of rebirth, or samsara. You can't get to Brahma. You can't merge with Brahma in one lifetime. How you act in your life is significant, and that will determine what kind of life you get the next time around in this cycle of reincarnation, samsara, which literally means flowing together. So depending on how you live your life, you move toward or away from union with Brahma, from this idea that you are one with Brahma. That's the ultimate goal, to be with Brahma. So in Hinduism, you're going to see an example of the caste system in a moment, which will clarify this for you. But if you live a good life, then you'll move up a rung in society. And if you live a bad life, you might move down a rung. Now, just to be clear, you could even be reborn as an animal, which is to say that Hindus believe animals have souls and consciousness, and so they are famously humane to animals, because perhaps that cat that you made fun of in your video that you then put on YouTube was, a person 3 lifetimes ago. Who knows? Okay. So anyway, you keep being reborn. This is the belief, of course, and that's not the goal, to be reborn better. The eventual goal is to merge with Brahma. How do you do that? You achieve moksha. This is the highest state. It's the perfect internal peace. Your soul is released, and you achieve closer to what Buddhists would call nirvana. And oh, is that Adrian? Adrian, hand up over there. Yes, this is the band Nirvana. Very good. That's Kurt Cobain. Slightly different. Moksha is the Hindu version of this concept, that you're free from the cycle of samsara, from the cycle of reincarnation. And the belief here is then you achieve the ultimate. You are one with Brahma. It has a huge effect on how people in India view their existence, and therefore on how they live their life. Now, this is very important, the caste system. Look at that. Not this sort of caste on the top right without the E, but a caste with an E. This is a social hierarchy, very much so. Ooh, you might be wondering, why is there a blue man in this pyramid? Well, that's because you can equate each of these castes, these social classes, with different parts of a person. And in fact, that is how they are written about in the early Hindu texts. So at the bottom, we have the Shudra, at the feet. They are the feet of the people. They are the serving caste, so they might serve tea to the Vaishya, who are the business caste. They are the thighs, because they are the workers, right? And then above them are the Kshatriya, the warriors. They defend the country and the people with their arms, get it? And at the top we have the Brahmin, the priest. They're the mouth and the brain, the head of this caste system. Now notice on the right side you can see that the Brahmin, it is spelled differently, partially because anytime you translate from one language group to another, you end up with different spelling. So this is true from Russian to English, or Mandarin to English, or in this case Hindi, or even Sanskrit. These are Indian languages, to English. Sanskrit is the more ancient of them. Anyway, so the Brahmin, they're the smallest percentage, right? They're just 3.5% of, this is modern day India. The Kshatriya about 5.5%, Vaishya 6%, Shudra 52%. They're the biggest of these groups. They're over half of Indians are in the Shudra class. So they are servants to others. Now, here's the crazy thing. These numbers don't totally add up to 100%, right? Because there are others. Now, many years ago, they would have been called the untouchables. They are below even the Shudra. They do things like cleaning up human waste. Now, because untouchables is kind of an offensive term, they've been renamed in the Indian Constitution the scheduled castes, or the Dalit. Dalit literally means oppressed. They are still to this day oppressed in Indian society. So this, by the way, this body is the body of the god Purusha. It's eternal and changeless. And then why are the Brahmin and the Kshatriya at the top? Well, perhaps that's because the Aryan invaders. Now, I should mention that some historians would argue that the Aryan invasions didn't go down the way that your textbook argues. Part of the point is that there are still interpretations, differences in interpretations and debates in history classrooms. Okay, good. Sorry, for a moment I thought my PowerPoint had stopped. Okay, we're back on track. Anyway, so assuming the Aryans did indeed invade from Iran and the Indus Valley, then they basically put themselves at the top. They are the Brahmin, they are the Kshatriya. And the people who were already in India, the Shudra, they occupy the bottom. And then later jobs start emerging, they're local creations. And they're still associated with one of the four castes, or they're outside of the caste system, below the caste system, as the scheduled caste, the Dalit, the untouchables. It allows for the exploitation of the poor, of course. It divided the poor so they're less powerful. But it has what some would argue are benefits to society. So this is, here's the thing. If you are Hindu and you're in this caste system, then it is very clear to you where you stand. You know where you are in relation to where Brahma is. Remember, you want to merge with Brahma. This is your goal. It's a codified manifestation of this reincarnation cycle of samsara. It's your visible player rank. So you video game nerds out there, this tells you where you stand in relation to moksha, the release of samsara, and the merging with Brahma. So this is your social class. So that's the basic structure of Hinduism and the Hindu caste system. What ends up happening is Buddhism emerges, and the person who creates Buddhism, founds Buddhism, is Siddhartha Gautama. Now, he is a Hindu prince. He's born a Hindu prince in about 5th, 6th century BCE in Nepal. Notice in the just northeast of India. Nepal is a very mountainous region, but he's a Hindu prince. He is extremely wealthy, and what starts him on his path toward Buddhism is he goes under this banyan tree, and he reflects on his life, and he decides that, well, he comes up with what you're going to learn of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. But at the core of it is he rejects his wealth. He wants to search for the meaning of life. And as he's under this tree reflecting on his life, here's what he finds: Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths. He decides that there are 4 things that are true no matter who you are or where you are or what you do. 1, all life is suffering. 2, suffering is caused by desire. Why do we suffer? Because we want things. But you can be freed from desire. There's some hope. How do you become freed from desire? Step 4, this is the 4th truth. You are freed from desire by following the Eightfold Path. So what's the Eightfold Path, you ask? Well, you had your 4, here's your 8. The Eightfold Path. First, you need right views. You need to see that, yes, indeed, there is a way out. There is a way to achieve nirvana, to break free from the cycle of want, of desire. You have to see that that is true, and then you need to aspire. You have right aspirations. You need to have the right attitude, and not want things, but want to move away from desire. So you need to speak wisely and thoughtfully and kindly, right speech. You need right conduct. You need to behave well, be kind to others, be compassionate. You need right livelihood. You need to, if you do these things, then you'll have lived a good life, and that's part of the goal, to be thoughtful and kind and compassionate. Right endeavor, working hard matters. You need to try at all times in order to have this right livelihood. Right mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is a fairly popular term these days, basically paying attention to your own thoughts, your own mindset, the thoughts and mindsets of others, always being aware. And right meditation. You may notice that meditation is key to Buddhism because you want this one-mindedness, single-mindedness at times, rather than assume you can multitask and do all these different things at once. In Buddhism, in meditation, the goal is to focus singularly and drown out, in a sense, ignore the things that are getting in the way of that intense focus. Focus, in this case, on achieving nirvana. Now, why is Buddhism significant in India? Well, during the Mauryan Empire, Ashoka, who had been this kind of cruel dictator type, he was a conqueror. He was very successful at it, but he was cruel. Ashoka is this conqueror, and what happens is he decides to convert to Buddhism, which changes the path for thousands, if not millions of Indians, probably millions of Indians if we add up all the people who have been affected by it over time, and makes Buddhism a lasting religion. He rejects the social hierarchy. So now, for a time under Ashoka, that caste system doesn't exist because Buddhism takes over. He, in fact, ends up etching or having people etch into stone, into rocks and pillars, these edicts, these teachings of Buddhism. Here's an example of what one looks like, and they are stored and placed throughout India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, the Mauryan kingdom, so that people can learn about Buddhism and learn how to act well, how to follow the eightfold path and understand the Four Noble Truths. So, how does this actually affect, how does Hinduism, how does Buddhism affect gender relations in India? Well, the news isn't so good. First of all, there's a strict patriarchal caste system. Men still dominate. They dominate the caste system. Women are not allowed to inherit property, unlike men. So somebody dies, your father dies, and you're the only daughter. Sorry, it's only the boys and the men who can inherit the property. Women are not allowed to read the sacred texts. They can't be Brahmin in Hinduism. So only the men get that job, which means women are farther from Brahma, farther from moksha. They can't remarry. Their husband dies, sorry, you don't get to have another husband, which isn't the same rule for the husbands who have wives who die. And women can't achieve moksha. Now, there is some hope in Buddhism because it is possible for a woman to achieve nirvana in Buddhism. And so we'll end our lecture there. This is a primer and introduction to Buddhism and Hinduism and its influence on social structures, in particular women in India. Have a wonderful evening.